Hello there, Sean Dick here, and I want to thank you for joining me for what will be my final presentation as the leader of operations for this phone company. I'm going to go over what we've done well and some of the hiccups that we've experienced. First of all, I don't want to waste too much of your time going over some of these items. I'm sure as board members, you keep busy with a lot of different things, but I do think it's important to refresh you on a few items so that it'll add some context. As you're aware, we sell two different phone models. Model A is a more basic type of phone targeted at cost-conscious customers. It, of course, costs our companies much less to make, and we can liquidate year-end excess inventories much closer to its cost. So by far, it's the less risky model to produce each year. But to keep current with trends, we do have our Model B. It has the latest premium features and is priced a little higher than the Model A. It also has a higher profitability per sale. Unfortunately, though, the Model B does have some hangups, no pun intended, since it becomes obsolescent faster than the Model A, and it costs the company quite a bit more if it's liquidated at year end. As you know, we have a brilliant design team made up of 6 experienced individuals who have impeccable instincts regarding feature selections that are available each year. Their advice normally proves to be invaluable to the company, and it helps me decide on preliminary production schedules at the beginning of each year. By combining their advice given with their provided individual and group consensus demand forecasts, we can average out the team's favorite selections of combinations of selections to arrive at the most worthwhile addition to our phone each year, which I have mainly based on the variance, or standard deviation from the mean, of the average demand figures that the team provides me with. Remember, whatever we add onto the phone, we add equally to each model. So for instance, if we decide on adding a stylish look to our phones, both Model A and Model B will have this feature built onto it. This is of course aided by our investments into the Celldex conference each year, which narrows down any necessary alterations prior to our sales season that begins in May and ends in December. So far, this approach has consistently been approved by Carla and Ankit, which each of the 4 years that I've worked here, including the use of the team's average or taking a high-low approach when the average's variance seems quite high. What I mean by that is that I'll take the highest demand number from one team member and the lowest demand team from another team member, and I'll average them out to find a demand forecast for that particular model. Finally, to conclude the overview of the firm, we must remember to stay consistent with our supply chain approach. As Lee pointed out with the development of the demand uncertainty framework, the nature of our industry is continual product innovation. This is why Model B becomes obsolete and cost recoveries are so difficult. We also build to order our phones in a mass customized fashion. This means that we must handle our supply chain with a responsive strategy each year to help us overcome external challenges that make demand for mobile phones go up and down across the market. This can be described as political or social conventions external to our control. It could be enthusiasm to buy our products for social status reasons, or it could be negative polls like bans in offices and lobbies. Of course, lowers demand. We must be flexible in handling our production because one month we might expect a certain amount to be sold, but that could change quickly and we might need 10,000 more in the market, lest we incur a loss of sales revenue. This is, of course, works in the opposite direction, where we might have already requisitioned a certain number of phones to be produced, but suddenly the market leaves us sitting on 10,000 extra phones, and that could cripple our profits if we don't act quickly and change our ordering time to compensate for that loss. Now, I want to go over what I believe are our company's top risks and what future management should pay attention to. Hopefully, my recommendations to handle these risks will be fruitful to overcoming them in the future, and they've helped me in the last few years. First of all, it's of dire importance that you listen to what the design team has to say about our product feature options each year before deciding what you should produce, what you should add to the production. It's of absolute importance that we add something each year to stay competitive in our industry. Otherwise, we might fall prey to losing our edge of distinction in the market as a company producing fairly generic phones, not offering something of interest that attracts customer purchases. Since this is something we can control and has a consequence to our demand and forecasting preliminary production schedules, we need to be absolutely sure that what we order will be consistent with what our experienced team believes will work with customers. To do so, managers should listen to the qualitative opinions of each team member given because sometimes, whether they all agree on it or not, There might be an obvious flaw in that design which may not be apparent from just looking at the quantitative demand figures they produce. From the quantitative data that we do get, we can see what features will do better than others in the market, and with the average demand and its standard deviation as I described, we should find the most successful features that do not disrupt our predictions for producing the number of phones we want to release in inception in May. It's important to remember at this point that yes, we can change our order before it arrives, but it costs the company $2 million to do so, which is certainly a cost that we should try to avoid as much as possible. Each feature added also adds a new cost each model equally, but certain features will add profits because the increase in sales price outpaces the cost to add that feature. This is important for us as a secondary criteria to selection because if the company can sell our phones and earn a higher profit per sale, then it can help to offset liquidation costs and additional holding costs per phone per month. Now, second to the choice of design features that the company can control is how well we treat suppliers and form good relationships with them. When we have fewer suppliers, we begin to depend on them that much more, and this reliance may have negative results if the supply chain is disrupted by any number of reasons outside of the company control. This could be political tensions, additional tariffs between offshore and our markets region, or even as simple as enhancing the supplier's power over us, because they might realize that they can charge us more to make our phones. Fortunately for us, though, we only have to deal with a maximum of 4 supplier sources and have strategically tiered our supplier relations so that we are not trying to source any of those parts from manufacturers. This helps us a lot because now we can focus more on our customer relationships, matching our production to demand, and of course, realizing more R&D for our next generations of phones. Anyway, the reason we want to form good relationships with our suppliers, both overseas and regional, is because we have to have flexibility to change production when demand swings drastically from time to time. This is made even more difficult, as I found in the first year of operations, because our contracts with these suppliers limit our reduction to orders to decrease only by 40%. Now, the final point that I want to go over with that our company can control is how much we order from each supplier and how well we control our costs to change orders when demand shifts. We need to set up our orders with the trust in our forecast that demand at the beginning of each year will be estimated very close to the actual amount when May arrives and we start selling these phones. Future managers need to balance how much of both of these models are made for higher costs of regional supplier facilities. By creating a more dynamic inventory management control system, we can have the ability to adjust stock levels and distribution to help in response to any unexpected change. However, there is a balance that needs to be observed because we can save so much in our costs if we utilize our overseas supplier at such an optimal level that we don't need to overpay for the phone production, and that way we can garner higher profits each year to keep us in business longer and stay in top position in the market. Although it's possible to use both overseas suppliers, I found through experience that the Far Away, which has a setup cost of $1 million, is the better choice of the two. Dealing with both 3 and 4 month lead times can add a little bit of unnecessary confusion to when products arrive. In determining how much of each model to procure from each of these suppliers, we need to remember that Model B is in fact more profitable than Model A, but only if it's sold before year end. When we reach December, Model A incurs a typical loss of about 10% of its cost to produce, while Model B is marked down about 70% of its costs. This stark difference, along with the fact that Model A is about $1 less per phone to carry month to month, means that we should manage Model B a little more regionally, a little closer to home. In other words, we need to make sure that we're not holding too much inventory of Model B each month because these costs do add up. And of course, if the excess is too great at year end, we'll be stuck with unnecessary markdown sales. Model A, on the other hand, is normally demanded in a much greater quantity each year. So it makes more sense to make as many of these we can from our cheaper overseas supplier. We can't risk ordering all of these phones overseas because we'll either end up with too many inventory for month-to-month demand shifts downward or have too many stockouts that will damage customer relationships, either in the form of unreliability to provide for the market, and that could decrease our sales potential, might even shift demand downward. I found that the right mix to order approximately 75% of Model A overseas and fill the remaining capacity at Far Away, which is $60,000 a month, with Model B orders. The last couple things I want to talk to you about have to do with opportunities that I can see for us in our future. First of all, I think it's important that we continue investing in the $2 million into the Celldex conference each year. It gives us a great insight into what demand is going to look like at the start of the selling year. But our main opportunities that I think are important that we need to invest in are adopting advanced technologies, investing in advanced demand forecasting tools and analytics, and possibly implementing a postponement strategy. So, advanced technologies include the Internet of Things, blockchain, AI, things like that that are quickly becoming used by a lot of our competitors. This helps us enhance visibility, traceability, and improves our data analytics through the entire supply chain. Tracking orders from overseas is critical to the company's ability to increase profitability on each phone sold. And using one of these technologies would certainly allow for much better enhancement of real-time monitoring. It will reduce inefficiencies concerning logistics of lead times and inventory replacement or control, which will help us make better decisions overall. When it comes to demand forecasting tools and analytics, these kinds of tools will allow us for a much more timely and accurate predictability of market demand. It'll help us leverage historical data, market trends, and customer insights, which I think the design team would be able to make very good use of. And they'll be able to optimize demand forecasts to better control inventory levels and production schedules with greater efficiency than before, because now we'll be able to use more predictive analytics. This will make the likelihood of stockouts or incurring excess markdown costs at year-end a lot less probable and increase our gross margins. The last opportunity that I want to talk about is implementing a postponement strategy. I believe Apple uses something similar to this, and I think we should follow in their lead. Now, considering both phone models are designed roughly the same way, it might be possible to find a differentiation point in the production process. This is where the parts that enhance Model B over Model A can be delayed and installed regionally prior to each month when they're closer to being ordered by the customer. This way, the production sourcing can be more flexible to match customer demand, become a finished good locally, but take advantage of lower overseas production costs overall. Now, mostly, I think this will make us more agile in our supply chain strategy and respond more effectively to the varying demand outlook experienced every year from external forces that I discussed earlier and consumer pressures that are put onto our company. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I just want to quickly also tell you about what I thought was the biggest turning point decision that I made over the 4 years. This one helped me the most positively. And what it ended up being was dual sourcing both regional suppliers to support fulfillment from low-cost offshore production. Now, it was not difficult to figure out that having 3 or 4 month lead time in an industry that requires such great flexibility required support from regional source closer to the market without lead time. What was not so apparent was the fact that production scheduling could only be reduced by so much per supplier per year, that they could only be increased to the facility's total capacity. When external forces that greatly diminished initial demand forecasts, such as the ban on phones in the lobbies and office spaces, and our company was left with nearly 10% more phones per month than needed after reducing production at the 2 facilities being used, it was obvious that I needed to change something. This also happened when demand increased, but production didn't fulfill demand because capacity was already being reached regionally, and supplementing offshore was impossible because of the lead time associated. We just couldn't get the phones to market in time. Now, by implementing a more resilient supply chain strategy to dual source regionally alongside the offshore facility, a preliminary production schedule for facilities that were closer could be set to make slightly more than they were prior without coming close to the capacity at either facility, and the amount overseas was set slightly lower to compensate for both possible demand increases later in the year, but still produce the majority of our phones at a lower cost. This was where it became much easier to adapt to these pressures of changing market demand and be more flexible to respond more effectively to adjustments in how many of each model were needed and at any given time during the year. This garnered us the highest gross margin And that happened in year 4, as you've seen in my report. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.